Anyone who played Diablo 2 had a nostalgia bomb when they saw Meteor in Diablo 4. I've been theory crafting the best Meteor build for literally all of Season 2, and it's time to release this beast onto the world. Greetings Internet, DDA here, and I am so excited to bring you my last guide for Season 2. It clears Tier 9 AOZ with relative ease and can only get stronger. My glyph is still not level 50. I haven't been grinding that much. So with a level 50 glyph, it can certainly go to at least Tier 14. Fire Sorceress's playstyle in the endgame is one that I am enjoying greatly. Fire is often ridiculed for its lack of crowd control, which I understand. But as I've gone over in my Fireball farming guides, Fire excels at being a healing tank, using warmth, putting burning effects on all of the enemies, and then with high damage mitigation, you're able to heal back most of the damage that you take. This makes Fire builds very sweaty to play. You seem to be jumping around and running around, as you can see in this clip. You just kind of have to dance around like a maniac in order to mitigate as much damage as you can, since you're not really crowd controlling. But hey, that's what we love about Fire. Fire is high damage, high risk, and high reward. It rains fire, explodes all over the mobs, and has big booms. You're gonna love this build. Let's get into the guide. So getting into the skills here, this build is, of course, utilizing Xfals. I just wanted to mention that. Xfals pairs very nicely with Meteor, since Meteor does have a fire burn effect and a fairly high lucky hit chance. We did do another video, a full breakdown on analyzing the fire percentage lucky hit chances. So if you haven't checked out that video, please check it out. Click on the upper bar. If you do watch that video, it does help you describe a lot of the choices that we make here and why we made certain choices. So getting into the skills here, what we have on our bar is Ice Armor, Ice Blades, Flame Shield, Teleport, Hydra, and Meteor. So now you'll see a lack of Inferno on this bar. We decided to drop Inferno. That was a hard choice, but mostly, again, check out that video. I calculated that Inferno has a very, very, very low lucky hit chance for Xfals, so I felt like it wasn't really justified for the little bit of mana that it was giving you. Being that we're also using Hydra now, Hydra is very mana efficient. For very little mana, it will give you a lot of damage and lots of lucky hit triggers, Xfals procs, as well as lucky hit restore primary resource. So I didn't feel, I've been playing a lot without Inferno. Being that we also have to stack a lot of damage reduction in this build, we have a lack of cooldown reduction. It's been running great without Inferno, so I think it was a good choice. The Hydra is really needed in this build, and we'll get into more of that when we go over the skill tree. I did want to talk about the enchantments briefly. We're using the Fire Bolt enchantment. The Fire Bolt enchantment pairs nicely with Hydra. Hydra stacks the Fire Bolt enchantment very quickly and allows you to trigger lucky hit procs a lot very, very quickly. And then likewise, it does help with Meteor too and gives it a little bit more of a lucky hit chance. So you're going to hear a lot about lucky hit. This is a heavily based lucky hit build. And then we're also using the Hydra enchantment. The reason that we're using the Hydra enchantment is because Meteor is extremely mana hungry, and you'll find that we have to invest a lot into mana regeneration. We make some choices to give us more mana regeneration. So being that we have to spend so much mana, this triggers a lot, and it adds a lot to our single target damage. Again, helping us trigger Xfals and just get a lot of burning procs and a lot of lucky hit. So when I originally was playing around with this build, I was trying different things. I was trying swaps, like I was trying to use the Incinerate enchantment while mobbing and walking through the AOZ dungeon, and then switching to the Hydra enchantment during the Bloodseeker fight. I inevitably just decided to completely drop the Incinerate enchantment. And if you watch that video, you know that Incinerate enchantment actually has an incredibly high lucky hit chance, triple anything else that Fire has to offer. It's almost a 22% lucky hit chance, I think. So it's crazy high. I don't know why it's that high, but I was using it, and it's funny because even with the obviously unintended high lucky hit chance, the Incinerate enchantment still is not good enough to use. Reason being is because, you know, it's every 14 seconds the Serpent spawns for 8 seconds, and the problem with this is the Serpent will spawn on a certain mob. It'll basically randomly choose a mob, and then it will just spawn, and it will shoot a straight fire line into the mob. And if you're running a high level dungeon, if you're running, you know, tier 100, or you're running Abattoir of Zir, you're moving around a lot, and you're dodging damage. Like we discussed in the beginning of the video, fire has a lack of crowd control, so you're going to want to move very much. And I don't know if this Serpent has neck problems or something. It literally cannot move its neck. It can't move like the area that it's hitting. It doesn't actually, it just spawns and it just shoots straight. So if the mobs move, if you move, you just lose out on all that damage. It takes 14 seconds for it to respawn then. So I just found that it wasn't really hitting the mobs. It would spawn on random mobs that were standing off to the side and not really hit anyone. It was especially bad during the Bloodseeker fight because you literally have to run around like a madman during the Bloodseeker fight, and it just wouldn't hit them. So, you know, Blizzard, please rework Incinerate from the ground up, both Incinerate enchantment and the Incinerate skill. Like, I don't see a reason why. This is a Serpent. It should be able to move, just like, you know, Hydra does a little bit. It should be able to move a little. Just move its head side to side and be able to hit mobs a little bit easier. I don't understand why that's not a thing, but it's just not usable in its current state. So now getting into the skill tree, we are going to put 2 points into Firebolt, and like we discussed earlier, that is going to be our first enchantment. Really great for lucky hit procs, so that's what we're going to use it for. We are going to have 1 point into Devastation, into 3 in the Elemental Dominance. This one is not needed so much, and you're going to see a theme throughout the build that we're going to want to pick up damage modification that affects all of our abilities. Like, for example, this doesn't affect Hydra. This does affect Meteor, but it doesn't affect Xfals. So I would have to do kind of like a damage distribution to figure out how much damage this is actually doing. Like, how much is the Meteor impact damage and fire actually adding to the build overall versus Xfals and Hydra. So I'm not sure, but it's in here because it's just a damage mod and it's enough damage. Moving down to the defensive skills, we were able to put 3 points in a Flame Shield just because of the points that we had left over. I would like to max this out, and then if you don't have Shaco, you'll probably have to take the rest of the points out of here just to distribute them across the other skills. Of course, we're still taking Teleport all the way to Shimmering Teleport for the DR. You'll be using that a lot. 3 points into Glass Cannon, excellent skill to scale Xfals, and then the 1 point into Elemental Attunement. Again, this is a lucky hit based build, so this is going to be triggering a lot, even with only the 1 point. We do use Ice Armor, but like I said, if you don't have Shaco, you'll just have to take a point out of Flame Shield and put it into Ice Armor, so you have that skill then. Moving on down to the Conjuration skills, you're going to put 1 point into Hydra and take it all the way to Summon Hydra. Now, I actually did test out Invoked, because I thought, and if you looked at my previous video about the Lucky Hit Xfals, I noticed that the Summoned Hydra burn is not triggering any Xfals procs. So I thought maybe because we were scaling crit so well, maybe I could use Invoked Hydra and I would actually do more DPS. But that actually wasn't true. I tested it out, and Summon Hydra ended up being more DPS, so Summon Hydra is staying for now. 3 points into Precision Magic, again, a lucky hit-based build, and again, in order to get the Ice Blade, you'll have to take that point out of Flame Shield if you don't have Shaco. I save a point here, and then we're still going with the Defensive Suite, Mana Shield, Protection. 3 into Conjuration Mastery. This isn't adding a amazing amount of damage, but it does add between 9 and 12% pretty often. You can actually get out up to 2 of the Hydra enchantments out at one time if you spend mana quickly enough. I have done that several times. So you know, this can add a fair amount of damage, and it scales Xfals too, which is nice. Coming down to the mastery skills, we're going to max out Meteor, take it to Mage's Meteor. Wizard's Meteor is good, but as we'll see later, we actually don't use the Adept Glyph. So Meteor is hitting a very small area, and I didn't want to depend on Meteor hitting the small area and then triggering the Immobilize, because I guess the theory would be if you put in Wizards, you can take points out of Crippling Flames, but I felt like the faster falling was just better for DPS, and then just being able to hit mobs, right? Because again, mobs are moving around a lot and moving quickly, so I like the Mage's Meteor. I prefer it, and just having the Crippling Flames, I have the points, so I can do this. If you really wanted to save the points and use these 3 points and Crippling Flames into something else, you could go into Wizard's Meteor, but I like the consistency of Crippling Flames personally. So of course then we are going to max out all the fire passives, all these fire passives here. Now one thing that I did test out, the first iteration of this build actually used Firewall, and I saw another content creator, the Gold Farming Guide, he uses Fire a lot, he uses Xfals. I think he's most known for the Charge Bolt Xfals build. That was a big build that he came out with. And he released a Meteor build that actually used Firewall, and used Firewall for the Wizard's Firewall, giving you mana regeneration. Now, this is not a bad idea, and this was my first iteration of the build as well. However, I found that there's a couple things. One, Firewall has a terrible lucky hit chance. I know it says 53 there, but it's about half as much of Meteor. That's what I calculated in that video. So the lucky hit chance is just not there. The damage didn't impress me. The fire damage did not impress me as well. It was good for mana regeneration. I noticed the mana regeneration, but I didn't want to just get mana regeneration for my enchantment slot. I wanted to get damage and mana regeneration, and that is what the Hydra enchantment gives you, because it gives you great single target damage. Xfals procs way more than Firewall, and then likewise it gives you, the lucky hit chance of the Hydra is just almost triple that of Firewall. So it really is no contest. You know, if you kind of even things out with the lucky hit restore resource, it'll probably be a similar amount of mana, just kind of over time. So I just didn't feel like the Firewall enchantment was worth it. So moving down to the ultimate skills, you'll see again, we do not run Inferno. That is a choice that we made to run Hydra on our bar, so we can have much, much higher, more consistent single target damage, and it's working out really, really well. And then likewise, we are going to put 3 into Fiery Surge. The 3 in the Fiery Surge helps out a lot during mobbing, during the running through the dungeon. So it's not going to help you during the Bloodseeker fight. However, what's going to help you during the Bloodseeker fight is the Hydras. Most of your damage to the Bloodseekers is going to be from the Hydras via Xfals. You're going to use Meteor, obviously, but you're going to have to move around a lot more. So this is okay. We can get away with this to only have this really be useful during the mobbing. And another thing I want to note, with the combo with the Hydra enchantment, we actually don't want mana cost reduction. What we want is mana regeneration, because we want to spend as much mana as possible, right? Because after spending 200 mana, a 5-headed Hydra spawns. So what we want is we want to spend a ton of mana and then have our mana come back very quickly. So Fiery Surge is preferred over, say, Soulfire, or even like when you're statting your gear, you want to focus on resource generation versus mana cost reduction. You can have some mana cost reduction, but I would prefer resource generation over mana cost reduction, because we want to spend that mana, right, to get those Hydras out. So we got 3 into Fiery Surge for the mobbing, for the dungeon, 3 in Endless Pyre. So this actually adds a fair amount of damage. I know, like, We are not a heavy burning build, but I tested it out, and it adds enough damage that it was worth taking in my eyes. We do stack a lot of burning effects. Every single skill that we use has a burning effect. We also have the burning effect from the Fire Bolt enchantment. So we're like stacking around 3 to 4 different burning effects on the opponent at all times. So this actually adds a fair amount of damage. It was noticeable when I would take it off and put it on. So I think it's worth it just to add that little bit of extra damage. And we have the points, so why not? And then 3 into Warmth again for our healing tank for our defense. And then we're going to go down and, of course, run Isu's Ferocity. This is going to help our Xfals mostly. I have considered running Combustion, but I just think the ability that this gives you with the hard-hitting Meteor and the Xfals is just better because it is fire damage because we're triggering it with a fire burning effect. So the Xfals does scale with anything that says that scales your fire damage. So going over the Vampiric Powers, I actually did something a little different than I've done in most of my other builds. I am using Resilience just like I did in the Fireball farming build. It pairs just so well with Warmth that it's just needed in this build. Resilience will give you damage reduction, and Warmth will be simultaneously healing you. It's just a great pair for your survivability. And with a lack of CC, we really need at least one survivability-based Vampiric Power. We're still running the Accursed Touch, Prey on the Weak combo. These are great for not only damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, but to keep all the mobs permanently vulnerable for Xfals, since Vampiric Curse lasts forever as soon as you apply it. Infection for the Tal Rasha stack. Now the thing that we're doing differently is we're not running Ravenous. Now I could see a world where you do run Ravenous and it feels kind of weird not running Ravenous. We've been running Ravenous in every single build permanently for the whole time. I noticed that with Ravenous I was running out of mana a lot. And Ravenous doesn't directly scale Xfals damage if you are out of mana, especially. So I decided that with the focus on Hydras that we have in this build, that Feed the Coven would actually be better. It gives you 10% multiplicative damage, so that's increased damage on Xfals. You notice it. And then likewise, the mana regeneration is huge. So the big thing that I think Feed the Coven is giving you, and why I think it's more DPS than Ravenous, the mana regeneration is huge, and then likewise the extra damage on Xfals. But most notably, because we're running Tibalt's Will in this build and we're using it to fill the hole in our mana regeneration, without Feed the Coven, you find yourself activating your Teleport and Flame Shield for mana a lot, rather than saving them to use in dire situations to break CC or to get out of bad situations. So I found that I was in situations where I would not have a defensive ability when I needed it because I had used it for mana earlier. What Feed the Coven is going to give you is it's going to even out your mana regeneration, give you more damage, and then allow you to actually save your defensive abilities to be used for what they're designed to be used for, actually defense. The mana regeneration this gives you is huge, and like I said earlier, you can have multiple copies of the Hydra enchantment out, and it's very easy to do with this level of mana regeneration. Now, I wouldn't knock anyone for running Ravenous, and if you have more mana rolls on your gear, like if you have more mana cost reduction or more resource generation on your gear, then I am suggesting potentially Ravenous could be better because it just allows for the Meteor spam. But with the way that I'm playing this build and running through the dungeon, I believe that Feed the Coven is stronger overall. So moving into the Paragon board briefly here, we were able to grab 7 boards. So 7 glyphs and 1 legendary node. That's what we're working with right here. So start out in our starter board. You're going to grab the non-physical damage here. Non-physical damage scales amazingly well with Xfals. It scales your Xfals damage. It also scales the Frigid Fate node. And then you're going to also put in the Elementalist glyph here. Amazing damage boost here. Amazing resist to all elements boost here. And it gives you the 15% multiplicative, more than 15%, because it also gives you the non-physical damage, which scales your Frigid Fate. So it's closer to 17 or 18% multiplicative damage. Great there. Come up then, and you're going to go into your heart, into the Enchantment Master board. And here is where I'm actually testing out a new glyph. And I really like this. So typically what Sorcs have been doing is they've been playing the Reinforced glyph that gives you 15% damage reduction when you have a barrier. And that glyph is amazing when you have Unstable Currents, because Unstable Currents uses a lot of cooldowns. That combos with your protection skill that allows you to get additional barriers whenever you use a cooldown. So people are, the Sorcs are having unlimited barrier whenever they are in Unstable Currents. That is not the case for this build. We only have a few skills that activate barrier. The barrier doesn't last forever. So I found that it was a really low uptime on the damage reduction from Reinforced. And also I found that I've been playing this build a lot at 0 mana. And I thought, hey, why not? Why not use Warding? So you take up to 25% reduced damage the less mana you have. So if you're at 0 mana, that's 25% DR. It's been working out great. Now you'll have to pay attention when you activate your Tybalt's Will, because we do use Tybalt's Will for mana regeneration. But the good thing about it is, like, Flame Shield is a big one to activate Tybalt's Will. So you're immortal when you're inside Flame Shield. So your mana will shoot up when you hit Flame Shield, but you're immortal anyway. So then you can spend all that mana, and by the time you get down to the 0 mana or low mana, then you'll need that damage reduction at that point. So I really like this glyph. It's been working out great for me, and I highly recommend it for fire builds, because fire is just so mana hungry. We don't have Crackling Energy, right? So then next, for your third board, you're going to come over to the Elemental Summoner board. This board, I have my Tears of Blood glyph in right now. It's at level 30 or 31, I think. And I just have it in here because it gives me extra resist all. It helps me cap out my resistances and reduce some points earlier to make sure I'm hitting those 7 boards. It does give me Conjuration skill damage as well, and we use Conjuration skills in this build, so that's not bad. And it also is a very quick way to grab this non-physical damage node. This, a lot of non-physical damage here, 35% non-phys here, and then a little bit more resist all as well. So I like this board. It's been where Tears of Blood has been sitting for me for a while. It's good. So then we're going to move to the Burning Instinct board. Love this board. Very, very strong. We are going to put our Unleash glyph here for mana regeneration. I know it only says 6.7%, but that is 6.7% that is going to be stacking on your resource generation, stacking on your Fiery Surge. When it's all said and done, this is actually giving you closer to 12, 13, or 14% extra mana regeneration. It's huge. It's noticeable when you put it in. And it's really needed in this build. Again, we want to spend as much mana as possible to summon those Hydras. So then you're going to get all this damage reduction from burning and damage to burning enemies. Make sure you come down here and grab the Safeguard. I don't have either of these armor nodes because I have enough armor from my rolls. My rolls are pretty decent on this gear set. So I don't need these to cap out my armor, these magic nodes here. But if you needed them, you could add them in. But you definitely should get the Safeguard, because when it's all said and done, this is giving you 20% damage reduction from elites. Very, very strong. Then you're going to come into Frigid Fate on this side and grab the guarded node for an extra 10% damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. 12% with the magic node. Really good there. Come up and grab this lucky hit chance. This is an extra 7.5% lucky hit chance that you can easily grab while you're getting the Frigid Fate node. You got to come over here anyway, so this is only 4 points that you need to spend to grab this lucky hit chance. Really easy to do here. and then come through, grab your extra vulnerable damage. And here's where I'm putting in the Enchanter glyph. Now, you have some options on this board. You do. I chose to use the Enchanter glyph just because there's a lot of intelligence here. It's very easy to activate. Being that we're using double fire enchantment, I thought it was useful for me to be immune to fire, essentially immune to fire damage. You know, you have that 80% damage reduction on fire. It is very noticeable. Honestly, I do not even pay attention to fire damage anymore on this build with the 80%. It's a nice, solid, good ability. And like I said, this is also giving us, I said in previous videos, this is also giving us the 52.8, so 5.3% on the Frigid Fate. So it's 6% on a good day. So you're still getting a high amount of multiplicative damage from this, even though it's a defensive glyph. However, you do have some options here. You could use the Imbiber glyph. Now, Imbiber is great to scale Xfals damage. So that's an option. It's triggered with willpower, and you have these 3 willpower nodes right here. Makes it really easy to activate. And likewise, you have the willpower right here. So it's really easy to activate both a willpower and an intelligence glyph in this board. Originally, I had the Adept glyph in here, but I found that the Adept glyph, while it's nice for the extra size on the Meteor, it doesn't scale Xfals at all. It only increases your mastery skill damage, the ability damage, so it's only increasing the damage of the Meteor itself. So I found that I reduced my damage very heavily by using the Adept glyph. You really want all of your glyphs to scale both the damage of your Meteor, the damage of your Hydras, and most importantly, the damage of your Xfals. So that's why the Enchanter glyph is superior here, in my opinion, because it gives you that non-physical damage, and then the multiplicative then in the Frigid Fate. Like I said, I would like to work the exploit glyph in here. I really would, but I just don't have many options for good dexterity boards. And we need the defense. We need the defense in order to fight in high-level AOZ. So moving on to our next board, this is the Ceaseless Conduit board. The Ceaseless Conduit board is amazing for dexterity, and that's where we're going to put our Destruction glyph. We are literally getting every single point in dexterity that we can possibly get, all the way up to 49 dexterity on our Destruction glyph. And this is just Xfals. When Xfals crits, it's critting for me right now between 10 and 15 million. So really, really strong, high level of damage for the Xfals. That's where this comes in. And for our last 7th board, we are gonna do the Searing Heat board for our Flame Feeder glyph. This is just for the raw multiplicative damage increase on Xfals and everything. Again, you could put exploit in here. I thought it's pretty much the same. You know, you got the 7.9 and the 1% multiplicative up to 10, whereas this is 9.9. So it's Flame Feeder is a little bit more than exploit, so that's why it's in here. Now, originally in the build, we did take Searing Heat as well to scale Meteor, but I found I was just using too many points in the Paragon board. I wanted to hit my 7 boards, so that way I could have more multiplicative damage for Xfals scaling, and this is only scaling the Meteor impact and the Hydra attacks, so I just didn't feel like the scaling on Searing Heat was working well enough with this build. You just want everything to scale all of your damage, mostly Xfals, because that is your primary damage. So moving on into the gear here, I'm actually going to switch over to the planner to better describe what the ideal gear set would look like. But I just want to briefly talk about how bad my gear is and how I'm still succeeding in Tier 9 AOZ even with this bad gear. For example, my amulet has movement speed on it. In an ideal world, I would either have +% intelligence on there, or I would have damage reduction from burning enemies on there. I could see them both as being great options. +% intelligence would be great because you see my intelligence is almost 1,000. So it would be great to scale the ability damage of everything just as your primary stat. It'd be a great damage scale, but probably going to go with the damage reduction from burning enemies, just because if you want to push in higher tiers, you're going to need that damage reduction. But like I said, like I have the movement speed on here, it's not helping that much. Likewise, moving down to my focus isn't great either. I got the double lucky hit on there. Well, it's fair, it's good, because I got the double lucky hit on there, which is what you really want, and I almost have perfect rolls on the double lucky hit. But mana cost reduction, I would prefer that to be resource generation, because again, you want to spend the mana. And then cooldown reduction is not good for this build. It only scales your defensive abilities, which are getting reset anyway from Elemental Attunement. We don't need cooldown reduction. So again, I would probably have another damage reduction from burning stat on here. And then likewise, my weapon, not great. It's not bad, but it's not great. I got mastery skill damage and damage to close. I'm not always close, and I would much prefer to have, you know, like crit damage and vulnerable damage on here to scale Xfals. So I'm losing out on a ton of Xfals damage on my weapon. I know that, so that's a big miss there. So I just wanted to point out the problems that I have in my gear set right now, just to show you that you don't need perfect gear, and you can still succeed with these builds. To go over your gear stat priorities, like I said, I don't have ideal gear for this build, so goes to show you that I'm still able to easily clear tier 9 AOZ with this build, even though my gear is not ideal. But to go over your ideal gear set, obviously you're going to use Harlequin Crest. Now there's some debate here as to whether you use Harlequin Crest or you can actually use Godslayer Crown. Godslayer Crown is actually better for your damage because it scales Xfals damage. Harlequin Crest does not scale Xfall damage. It just gives you the +4 ranks, which allows you to save some points in Ice Armor, Ice Blades, and Flame Shield. And then you can just dump all your points into Flame Shield. But what Harlequin Crest does give you is the 20% damage reduction. And that's kind of where it just goes into, oh, you just have to use this. It also gives you the resource generation, which is this build's best mana regeneration stat. It stacks really nicely with Fiery Surge and the Unleashed Glyph. So resource generation on the helm is just too good. But if you didn't have Harlequin Crest, you could use Godslayer Crown. Like I said, it's actually higher DPS because it scales Xfalls damage, but you're going to lose out on defense, so you have to note that and kind of play around with that. For your chest, you're going to go with a quad DR chest, damage reduction from close, distant, total armor, and damage reduction from burning enemies. You could mix in a max life roll there, but I don't recommend it. If you have it, it's fine. Maybe take away a damage reduction from close or distant for the max life, but I wouldn't really recommend it. You really need the stacking DR there, and then throw Disobedience on your chest. For the gloves, this is kind of where you could have differences here. I'm running a standard glove with lucky hit chance, critical strike chance, attack speed, and restore primary resource. You could try Fists of Fate, but you're losing out on lucky hit and crit chance, so I really wouldn't recommend it. Likewise, you could try Frostburn and utilize the control glyph if you felt like you really needed CC, but again, you're losing out on the lucky hit chance. And I really like the Serpentine aspect here. It gives you an extra Hydra, and it increases the mana efficiency of the Hydra, increasing their duration. So longer time that you have them out, that you don't need to recast them. It helps a ton during the Bloodseeker fight, having 3 to 4 Hydras instead of two Hydras. You can have a lot of Hydras out with this aspect, and I think with how aggressive the Bloodseekers are and how much you need to move, the Hydra damage is the biggest part of your damage during that fight with the Xfalls proc. So I really like this aspect. The other aspect that you could try is the aspect of control for the increased multiplicative damage when targets are immobilized, which will scale Xfalls damage. But again, just because I think the consistency in damage and the extra mana from the Feed the Coven Vampiric power with this extra Hydra, I just think it's better to have the additional Hydra. We're running Tybalt's Will for the pants. These are absolutely needed because the 40% multiplicative damage on Xfals is too much. Plus, it gives you mana regeneration. So this is how we're filling the main mana regeneration of the build. So we have Feed the Coven and Tybalt's Will, as well as the Unleash Glyph, giving us primarily the big portion of our mana here. This is 100% needed. If you didn't have this, you could get a pair of pants with plus Meteor, but you're going to be heavily reducing your damage not having Tybalt's. You will have more defense with going with a standard pants, and you could throw Ever Living on there for even more defense. So if like you didn't have Shaco, maybe switch out the Tybalt's and then throw Ever Living on there to make up for it, since you'll be using the Godslayer crown. But it's going to be a lot less damage if you do that. So just keep that in mind. We're going to do Esu's Heirloom for the boots. These are standard. You absolutely needed to scale your Xfals damage. This is going to give you a lot of critical strike chance, a lot of critical strike damage for your Xfals. Just really huge. You want Xfals always critting because the damage is so high on it when it crits. So for your wand, you're going to want to use a wand for the lucky hit. And then you go Intelligence, all stats, critical strike damage, and vulnerable damage. Both of those stats are just flat damage increases right on to Xfals. Love it, love it, love it. Especially the critical strike damage, since it scales so well with the Destruction Glyph and with our Devouring Blaze. For the aspect that you're going to put on your wand, you're going to put Shattered Stars. This adds meteors, additional meteorites to your meteor, and the meteorites actually have a burning effect that triggers Xfals. It triggers Xfals at a decent rate at about 1.5% per burning tick, so that's not bad. The main thing that we're getting here is, since we're not using the Adept Glyph, the Shattered Stars is allowing our meteors to cover much more area. Again, the main damage that we do is from Xfals, so we want to cover as much area with our AoE, and the meteorites help us do that. On your amulet, we have Ranks of Devouring Blaze, plus mastery skills, and a total armor and damage reduction from burning enemies. So here, an argument could be made that you don't drop off the plus mastery skills and instead add plus intelligence, because I think that plus intelligence actually does scale Xfals damage. So it's worth considering. I think both could be good. So definitely try that out. I just happen to have a amulet with plus mastery skills. I still think it's good too, because it gives a lot of damage to your meteor. So I think both are good. And then the aspect we have on here is Storm Swell for the highest multiplicative damage on our Xfals that we can get. Two rings that we have Tal Rasha's and Xfals. So those are kind of locked in. Xfals is, of course, cornerstone to the build. You want to maximize the proc damage before anything else on the ring. Just get a maximum roll of the proc damage first, and then try to maximize your lucky hit after that. Then after that, try to maximize the cooldown reduction because it's still useful. Tal Rasha's Iridescent Loop is cornerstone. Again, I mentioned earlier that our only form of lightning damage is teleport. So you're going to need to teleport on top of the mobs to activate the lightning damage. It's not really a big deal because this is a high damage reduction, high tanky build, and you shouldn't have a problem. And for your focus, this is an ideal focus for me. Lucky hit, resource generation is just too good of a stat. And then damage reduction from burning enemies and critical strike chance. This is a lot different than the focus that I have. I have a double lucky hit focus. I think lucky hit, while you have a barrier, is a good stat on here as well. You could take off the damage reduction from burning, or maybe the resource generation stat for an additional lucky hit with barrier, but I felt like the uptime of the barrier kind of brings back lucky hit with barrier a little bit, so the resource generation is just worth more overall. And then the aspect you want on here is the conceded aspect, again for the raw damage increase of Xfals while we have a barrier. And there you have it, your Meteor Boom Boom guide. I have had so much fun playing this build. It is just running around and seeing all the explosions. This build is so visually appealing. It makes you feel like a true fire sorcerer, just having the fire rain down from the skies and seeing explosions, seeing giant chunks of damage from Xfals and Meteor crits, just huge damage numbers that you see. It feels so satisfying. I wanted to showcase this build and how I do a Bloodseeker fight. You can see that I pulled the Bloodseekers with the Hydras. I think that's the most important thing that you do. Make sure that the Hydras are engaging for you, so then that way that it puts the burning effect and immediately on them, and likely activates vulnerable as well, so you get both of those damage reductions from vulnerable and from burning enemies immediately on them, so they're not hitting you at all without that damage reduction active, because you could get one shot otherwise. So like I said, I want to showcase how to fight the Bloodseekers. The fight does take some time because you need to stack burning and get Xfals really rolling. So I'll just let this play out, and if you like this video, please hit that like button. Please hit subscribe for all the best Diablo 4 content. We're going to be coming out with tons more videos moving into Season 3, more build guides. We'll probably start playing other classes other than the Sorcerer, so stay tuned for that. And as always, turn your dial to Random Number Gaming for weekly updates for the best Diablo 4 guides and build videos.
I'm not ready yet.